I'm Carolyn Petrosino. I'm a professor at Bridgewater State University, and I'm here today in Philadelphia at the ASC annual meeting.
Tell us about this research that you just introduced to the American Society of Criminology today. It was very compelling.
Yes, the research I presented today had to do with capturing the attitudes of African Americans in regards to how they perceive racially motivated hate crime. I find it astounding that as long as we've had a history of anti-black crimes committed against this community, that in regards to hate crime scholarship, there's very little sustained, focused examination of that community's perceptions of this type of crime. And so my motivation was to address that deficiency. And so my research involved a mixed methods approach where I used survey data and also in-depth interviews to ask questions about how African Americans perceive anti-black motivated crime. And I used Charleston mass shooting as the object of focus in order to springboard off for the interviews.
So the Mother Emanuel massacre in 2015 was the wellspring for this research.
Absolutely, and the reason why I chose that deliberately because it was such a high-profile incident that I knew that most African Americans, if not all African Americans, would be able to relate to the question and be able to have formed opinions about it because it was so well covered.
And what were some of your findings? There were some really interesting quotes also from some of the respondents.
Yeah, I think, and this is very preliminary research, but one of the things that struck me is that, the average respondent is a middle-aged African-American woman who was functioning well in her world, and yet she reported pretty much that she had been a victim of racial discrimination and relatively recent within the last 6 months. And not only that, but 1/3 of my sample also reported that they had been a victim of a hate crime. And we know that...
Whoa, how many?
About a third of my respondents.
Of a hate crime or a hate incident?
Hate crime, that was the question put to them.
One of the things that we've seen is that sometimes people can't differentiate between a hate crime and a hate incident.
That's true, and that could very well be part of that, but one of the things that struck me is that we know that through UCR and NCBS...
Uniform Crime Reporting, which is the FBI's annual hate crime report, and then the victimization surveys, which deal with residential home surveys, where people actually go to and ask questions whether or not the hate crime was reported or not.
And what we learn is that it's far more underreporting that occurs than reporting of hate crime. And so when these individuals say to me that they've been the victim of a hate crime, I can't immediately dismiss it because we know that the national statistics doesn't capture everything.
And there might be very well hate incidents as well that are targeted against these respondents too.
That's correct. And one of the things that also was interesting to me is that these were middle-class, middle-aged black women who reported these recent incidents of discrimination or what they believed to be a hate crime.
Wow, so these respondents wouldn't necessarily be the individuals that one might think would be the primary target of hate crime, yet they're still being attacked.
This is exactly true. I found most of these individuals were like representative of the pillar of the community type of person, employed, family-centered, no kind of axe to grind sentiments being expressed. That's what made it so compelling.
Wow, because Oprah Winfrey, for instance, one of the most beloved and consistently highly rated for popularity people, that didn't really stop people who were in that similar cohort, at least not necessarily income-wise, but otherwise demographically, from being a target.
That's right, and one of the things that was asked in the survey was, how do you perceive the safety, the level of safety of African Americans as they travel throughout the United States? And it was like 64% of the respondents said African Americans are not free to travel anywhere in this country and feel safe, that there's going to be some vulnerability and that that's a natural part of the black experience.
And you found that they feel both unsafe in poor communities almost irrespective of the race of those communities.
Exactly. That was a class effect more than race. But the other thing that was astounding when I asked about whether or not, in general, whether we're talking about traveling about as a free citizen or not, that my respondents saw that African Americans were more vulnerable, more unsafe than Caucasians as a whole. That was 84% of the respondents stated that.
But most people did not think that Dylann Roof was representative of white people.
No, and a specific question was asked in the interview whether or not the Charleston event caused them to distrust or see whites as untrustworthy. And they rejected that. It was unanimous that that was not the case. There was a preference to believe that individuals should be taken at face value, on an individual basis, and that there was a reluctance to be condemnatory towards all whites.
But nevertheless, there was one comment that struck me where a woman said they even bought him a hamburger. It was almost as if it was a thank you.
Yes, yeah, and that's one of the things that was unexpected that I understand is some of the responses that received in the survey as well as in the interview was kind of an indictment of law enforcement. In fact, especially with the spate of shootings of unarmed black men, some of the respondents said that should be included as a hate crime. And so occasionally what would come up in an answer is that our level of vulnerability, our meaning the black community, is also reflected in the fact that you cannot trust law enforcement to protect you.
And this kind of unique threat that's felt, that's coming from different directions. Mm-hmm. You saw, this impact of prejudice had real psycho-behavioral issues related to it, that people were actually very upset.
Yeah, it was interesting because part of the interview required me to show them a copy of the SPLC hate map. That's the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Which shows all the hate groups across the United States and where they are.
And the respondents all were shocked, they were dismayed, visibly upset. I had one even tearful, shaking, not having any idea that there were so many hate cells in the country, especially on the East Coast. And it caused me to think about the health repercussions of this constant living with this anxiety of the unsafeness of the black experience and possibly being targeted at any given moment of time.
What are some of the takeaways from this research, as a variety of other social surveys say that race relations are perceived to be at quarter-century lows, whether it's Reuters or CBS? Your research digs deeper into this. What are some takeaways that you would want the public and other researchers to know?
Well, it's so interesting because I think certainly what I found seems to support that notion that race relations are not very good at all. But also this whole idea of this double consciousness, this straddling of identity that African Americans deal with on a routine basis.
And women too.
And women as well. There are many. We can find this configuration probably with many groups, and that is whether or not your claim as an American citizen bumps up against your claim as an African American. So it's this interesting kind of dynamic between, if you choose race, does that mean you're disloyal to the United States?
Wow. So if you want to seek racial equality, there's the albatross that you're not patriotic.
Exactly, and we see that borne out in the NFL protest. Du Bois actually wrote about this as far back as 1913, this two-ness nature that African Americans deal with on a regular basis. And we see that with Colin Kaepernick voicing his protest against police brutality against unarmed black men, and what happened as a result of that is that his loyalty or his patriotism was being questioned.
Yeah, where they said where the president said, "Fire these son of a you-know-whats."
Exactly.
But after Charlottesville, said some very nice people.
Exactly. So we have that. That was an interesting kind of finding, but also this whole issue of resilience and how African Americans who have to straddle this fence routinely, how are they able to do that and to continuously live their lives in a constructive way. And so that forced me to look at resilience literature and understand what that means, and also the idea of community cohesiveness and collective efficacy, and whether that plays a role in how African Americans understand hate crime victimization.
Could you just define resilience?
Resilience studies seek to understand how individuals who are exposed to high stress events, trauma, are able to cope and develop manage this kind of stress level by developing coping mechanisms. And so it has application here, because if what I saw in my interviews, we have people who are physically upset because of awareness of the vulnerability for being black, what are the health consequences of that? And so
we're literally hurting people, not just psychologically, but this prejudice against African Americans has a profound personal, physical component as well.
Right, and then you can understand it, because especially when you look at patriotism versus racial identity, because racially motivated crime, especially against the black community, is a part of the American identity. It is actually bound up in ideas of what America stands for, which is part and parcel of what patriotism represents. So you could see this contradiction. You know, when I embrace national identity, does that mean that I am somehow in denial about my vulnerability as an African American? This is the crux of the matter. This is one of the interesting things that I think my study is going to delve into deeper and analyze.
And African Americans, even though they've been declining somewhat as a percentage of overall hate crime victims, still are the #1 target, over 28%. They're only 13% of the population.
That's correct. When you look at the racially motivated category, it's been consistent over the last, I dare say, 15 years. Probably from the time that they began to collect this data, where we see this dominance in terms of anti-black motivated hate crime.
Do you think there's been a little bit of a backlash with respect to this double-digit increase in anti-white hate crime? In other words, as white nationalism has become more prominent over the last couple of years, do you think there's some people who are responding not only by being physically upset, but maybe a small subset are acting out?
You mean against
against whites, for instance?
You know, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how that plays out. I certainly know that, especially with the political climate today, with having the sentiments expressed from the highest office in the land, almost it's tacit approval to act out in a way that kind of divides us more.
So some people might say, "What the heck," you know?
Right. America is supposed to be our homeland, our meaning a white homeland, and so that's why I think we see what we see in terms of the boldness of the white nationalist movement to continue to press for their agenda.
Yeah, and some of the emboldenment with regard to white nationalism that's scary is this encroachment into the mainstream, which might make some people feel, okay, you know, all bets are off.
You're absolutely right, and there was nothing more shocking than Charlottesville to see the neo-Nazis marching with torches and saying Jews will not replace us. I mean, I teach a course on the Holocaust, and it was frightening to see that here in America. And yes, I mean, we have to pay attention, because there is a signal that people in this movement are receiving from where do you...
That whites are under attack.
That's right. And also, this was very predictable. Years ago, I saw where America's demographics were changing, and America's becoming less white and more brown.
Yeah, 61% Anglo-white. Now 47% of Americans are white Anglo-Christian, so they're now in the minority.
Right, and so there's going to be a natural pushback on that, and that's why you see the sentiments being expressed that whites are the oppressed group now. They're the ones under the attack now. Well, that really is about losing, or the perceived loss of power. and the resentment that comes through that. So it's an interesting thing, a dynamic to watch. I think in this country for the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's really going to be important for us to understand sociologically and politically what's happening all around us.
Is there anything that we missed in asking you?
No, I can't think of anything else. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my research.
Dr. Carolyn Petrosino, Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. That's just outside of Boston, right?
That's correct.
I can't say go Red Sox, but we do appreciate
Go Pats.
There you go. Oh my goodness, your insightful research, and we hope to see more of it in the years to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.